lot going on in the world of customs and global logistics and at those intersections. So thank you all for joining us on really very short notice. We decided to do this webinar around midnight last night as I was writing up a blog post and kind of keeping track of everything. Realized, man, there's enough content here. We've got to get the word, start talking to our customers more directly. So thank you. We had over 2,700 people register for this webinar that we just announced about 5 hours ago. So obviously there's a lot of enthusiasm is probably the wrong word, but people are definitely curious and need to learn more. So hunger for knowledge. Before I go in, I do want to, legal team always asks me to do this, but I feel like it's probably more appropriate on this webinar than more important than ever is like, this is for informational purposes only, and you really shouldn't rely on everything you hear in this seminar for legal and business advice. Your personal, your business situation may be unique and different. So make sure you talk to us in person or live one-on-one about any specific issues that you hear here. It's possible we'll make some mistakes. There's a lot of brand new kind of information that we've just heard about. And then I want to introduce and come up on stage here, Bernie Hart, who's our Flexport's head of customs, vice president of our customs and trade advisory business, where we help. I don't want to date Bernie, but he's got many, let's just say decades of experience in this industry, and is a real pro at helping companies to stay compliant and helping them find opportunities in their customs operations to save money and run a tighter ship. So great to have Bernie with me today to help me and all of you explore what we've learned, what is new, what's happening. And that is our agenda ultimately, is to explore what has happened, what we know so far from Liberation Day, as they call it, the new tariffs that just dropped and some other programs that have really changed very dramatically yesterday, as well as we're going to explore some areas of nuance and some open questions that we still have that we're going to try to find out the answers to in the coming days. I'm going to take you through a little bit about the macroeconomic story, what this meant in the broader economy. And then, of course, what you all want to know is what do we do now? And then we will try to leave time at the end for Q&A. On the right side of your webinar, you can see the Q&A tab. So go ahead and post your questions there. We're gonna try to take as many of them as we can as we have time for. So yeah, first off, what has happened? And we know first off is that what the administration is calling reciprocal tariffs dropped. I'm not going to take you through every single detail here. I'm sure you guys are pretty in tune with it. We will highlight some important exemptions and carve-outs, and then talk through the end of de minimis. That's a really big deal. And was pretty buried in the executive order. We kind of found it on Section H of one of the executive orders that de minimis is going to go away, not just for China, which we've long known about, but also for the rest of the world. And timeline on that, we'll talk it through a little bit. So yeah, first off, the reciprocal tariff announcement. The baseline here is a 10% duty on every country in the world. This is done under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which was a Carter administration act. 1977 is really about the oil crisis and giving the president powers to declare certain goods, to impose duties on things that are national security issues. And those goods are ineligible for duty drawback. So all the new tariffs here will not be eligible for duty drawback. And then there is also some nuance here that goods in transit may be eligible to enter under the old rates, but like we're going to talk through the timeline on that. You basically have to get those loaded on a ship in the next day or two. So it may be too late if you haven't already gated in at the port of origin. We also saw country-specific tariffs. I'll take you through the highlights on that in a moment. But those were ranging from 11% up to 50% based on what country they were from. And then USMCA, that's the replacement for NAFTA, that has been exempted for now. There is an act that remains exempted. There is an act that has passed the Senate that would declare that there is not a national emergency of fentanyl emergency on the Canadian border. And so if that, my instinct says the president will probably veto that act and it will remain exempted, but there's some chance that will end. Okay, so this is the official table here. The fact it's much longer, the number of countries, but these are the highlights, especially the one on the left of the countries that are most impacted by this. It is very important to note in all of this that these are cumulative duty rates. They are adding on to existing duty rates. So in the case of China, this 34% rate adds to the 20% that they've already imposed, which adds to the Section 301 tariffs, which were between 7.5% and 25%, which all of that adds to whatever was pre-existing before Trump's first administration, really. And then what has not been covered yet was this tariff proposed on any country that imports Venezuelan oil of another 25%. So that's potentially still lingering in our future. So China still is definitely clearly the biggest target of this, but there were some surprising things here. Now, I've been warning customers for months that places like Vietnam and other parts of Asia are not the safe havens you may think they are. That I know the administration's been pretty clear that they're focused on trade imbalances, and our trade imbalances with some of these other countries are similar to that with China. And so to see the 46% tariff, I think that caught a lot of people off guard, but we've been warning people for quite some time that you may have problems. One interesting thing in note here, well, how this was calculated. First off, the administration has this term reciprocal tariff. I was on Jim Cramer Mad Money yesterday, and I joked that it's kind of like the administration's version of community adjusted EBITDA that WeWork used to use. It's the community adjusted tariffs. So you have, but it is true that tariffs applied by other countries are higher than those applied by the U.S. This graph here comes from J.P. Morgan's chief economist and shows that it shows you the tariffs that the U.S. applies relative to the same tariffs, the tariffs applied by those same countries reciprocating, and you can see that U.S. tariffs are lower in every case than the other countries. However, if you listen to, and there's a great interview that Lighthizer did, the former U.S. trade representative. He did an interview 2 weeks ago that you can find on Spotify, where he says that yes, tariffs are a problem, that other countries charge higher tariffs, but his main point was that it's really not about the tariffs. That's not the major issue. The major issue is industrial policy, things like suppression of organized labor, environmental regulations, subsidized credit, export subsidies. The list goes on of things that they allege that other countries do. And he says these are far more important than tariffs as a trade barrier and as a factor creating imbalanced trade. And so his point of view is that the tariffs are the easiest and most effective way for the administration to respond to those non-tariff barriers. And so that's what they tried to get to in this table. Actually, if I go back, you see on the left, it's a little bit small to read here, but the left side, there's an asterisk there. So these are not the actual tariff rates that other countries are charging the United States. These are the sort of community adjusted tariff rates. So it's trying to account for, they claim, this is the administration claim, trying to account for all these industrial policies and other non-tariff barriers to get you to that number. And then the president claims he's being kind by cutting that number in half. Well, one interesting nuance here was our team did a little bit of math, some basic math. We figured out with some help from our friends on the internet that the tariffs were actually calculated in a much more simple way. It was they just took the trade deficit that the United States has with each country. That's the level of exports they have minus the imports that that our imports minus the exports rather, and they divided that by the imports from that country, and that gets you the effective tariff rate of these other countries. This graph showed you what we would, if you did that math, what the formula would predict, and you can see it's 100% exactly what happened here. So it was a very simple formula, a little bit lazy, I might say, possibly generated by ChatGPT. I don't know. This is a little bit too simple. When I first saw the rates get published, one thing you'll note is that Latin American countries had much, much lower duty rates than Asian countries. So at first glance, it looked like, oh, they must be trying to send some signal that, Latin America is our friend. We want to do manufacturing in Latin America as kind of America's backyard and the strategic interests that we have there. But then when you see this, it seems like it just sort of naturally fell out from the trade flows that happen to exist with Latin America rather than some grand strategy. It does come back to the same J.P. Morgan economist who created the other graph I showed you, had his big framing of all of this is is they are these serious people, and are they serious? And I think this one starts to call into some question about how serious they might be. They're deadly serious, though. That said, they've done some silly things like they put a tariff on this island. I've never heard of it before. The Herd and McDonald Islands. Well, the reason I've never heard of it is that no people live there, and there's only penguins. But they did call them out, and there's now a 10% duty. So some of these things they're done en masse, and it's sort of a silly thing. Not that any of this is funny, but there were some. You try to do something this big, this fast, you're going to make some mistakes. So an important call out. I want to call Bernie up here to talk a little bit about what the reciprocal tariff not apply to. And the big categories are semiconductors, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, some critical minerals, copper. And then there's an Annex 2. We'll post it on our website today, but that link there, that HTS link, takes you to Annex 2, which has this long list of exemptions of HTS codes. So if you're a Flexport customer, your team, please know we are actively going through every HTS code that's been exempted, and we will be finding your codes. That's happened already for the last few hours, and the team will be calling you and emailing you and walking you through, hopefully finding some relief in there. Bernie, you want to talk through what is Annex 2 and where does, I don't know. I mean, I'm not expecting you to know where it came from, but what is the concept behind that? And anything that jumped out at you is that I'm missing in these top level things here.
Yeah, I mean, the Annex 2, I mean, everything really comes back to the HTS number. The HTS number is the cornerstone of trade. Once you have that HTS number, of course, it gives you the duty rate, but it also talks to you about admissibility. That's out of a country and then into the next country. So you want to look at everything at the HTS level. This is what every customs agency around the world tracks for importers and exporters. And the way the government is doing this is they're basically looking at when they go out and they assign an additional tariff or reciprocal tariff, whatever it happens to be, they assign it to an entire category of HTS number. But there are, as you already alluded to, there's nuances and there's edge cases for each of those individual products that might fall underneath that HTS. That's where you get into a lot of these. Does it apply? Does it not apply? Is it stacking? Is it not stacking? So we've got a few examples here. So goods paying steel and aluminum, that's your Section 232 duties. These do not apply. If you're paying automotive on the 232, it does not apply. Now, column 2, this is specifically called out in the HTS. This is for countries like Belarus, North Korea, Cuba, and then Russian Federation. That's primarily due to the fact that we're not doing much trade with them at all because there's restrictions in place today for us to do trade with those countries. So it doesn't make sense to include them in this overall process. But there is also the
kind of last. It didn't prevent the administration from taking a lot of heat for leaving Russia off.
Correct.
So a lot of people alleging that it's because Trump is buddies with Putin, but I don't think that's the case. These guys
has nothing to do with it. You already can't do business with them today. So it kind of is what it is. But then the last bullet here, any future goods impacted by the future 232 changes. What this does is leave the door open. As we've all learned going through this process, we get updates in the morning. Those updates can change by the afternoon. What we're all waiting for is these executive orders to turn into Federal Register updates. Then we, as the community, can sit down and actually code for this, if you will, and then allow for it within our business processes and as we submit to the government. So we make sure we're following the rules and regulations as defined. Okay. And again, this is going to continue to change.
Yeah. Okay. And we'll talk through what those Section 232 and some of these other terms mean in a little more detail in a future slide here. But one thing to call out here is that the duties go into effect on April 5th and April 9th. April 5th is for the 10% countries, and April 9th is for the rest, if I'm not mistaken. And so this is just an example of goods this is in U.S. time zone, by the way. So Vietnam, it's already April 4th, or it will be shortly over there. But this is based on U.S. time zone. So you have about 24 hours. If the container gets loaded, it will still be under the prior duty regime. If it's loaded between the 5th and the 8th of April, that'll be a 10% duty. And then after April 9th, you're going to go to 46% duty. again, like given that the cargo has to gate in, it's about when the cargo is loaded onto the final mode of transport is how the law is written, or how the executive order is written. That's quite interesting, that final mode of transport, because that implies that, there's some debate internally here. What about a transshipment? But its final mode is the way it's written. So presumably it doesn't matter if it changes ships, it's still in the same mode. However, if it was to go to Canadian rail and then come across the rail as the final mode, so it would have to be loaded on the railroad today or tomorrow, by April 9th, let's say,
9th.
in this schema. So, these things sound like technicalities, but it might be a lot of money on the table that you guys are going to want to go dig into, and Flexport's team will be helping customers manage that. We are fighting really hard. Next 24 hours is going to be kind of intense for us to try to get as many containers loaded as we can on your behalf. And that last piece there, that if the automated manifest system is what CBP is going to be using for this. That's every container has to be filed through the AMS system with CBP. And so there are some cases where the date on the AMS doesn't line up with the actual vessel on board date from an ocean carrier. And that may be very valuable date for you to manage to and dispute if so, and CBP might come after you, and you may want to go back and challenge them if they get things wrong there. So staying on top of that might be worth, tens of thousands of dollars all of a sudden. So, and then this slide's a bit dense, so bear with us here, but this is our sort of high level cheat sheet. You'll see on the left side, normal relations is just like prior to any of these other changes that have taken place. IEPA we talked about, that's that 1977 Emergency Powers Act and that's what Trump has invoked here on the fentanyl duties on Mexico and Canada and others. Then Section 301 is what he invoked, and Biden also invoked during the kind of first administration in Biden's term to increase duties. Section 232, you want to talk about Section 232 for us? That's the steel and aluminum, but there's some nuance to this. I want to make sure Bernie helps us get it right.
Yeah, from the 232 side, there continues to be more and more updates coming out under the 232 guidance, steel and aluminum, things like. And we have a couple of examples coming up and some subsequent slides here about how that overall applies. And what we really want to think about with this is that stacking tariffs concept. Are these in addition to? Are these replacing? So when we walk you through 2 or 3 examples, we're going to show you one that it actually is replacing, one where it's on top of. But again, all of this really comes back to the HTS number. And then within the HTS number, you need to see where your products fall and then understand what those rules of interpretation are, i.e. specifically, are they going to be subject to this additional duties and tariffs associated with it? So there's some derivatives that came out with the 232 steel and aluminum, whether, where it was poured, where it was melted. This took supply chains a little bit by surprise in terms of they had to have that level of specificity that they probably never have had to have before. So we're seeing that, Ryan, pretty much across the board, where businesses are now being asked for a lot more detail about their supply chain. There's this old adage, you should be able to track everything from dirt to shirt type of an approach, but we're seeing that more and more. It was originally coming out for UFLPA for forced labor, but now we're seeing it more from a manufacturing, more from a business perspective. So it makes a difference now if you are a furniture importer, by way of example, and you've got steel and aluminum that's involved with that. Where did that steel and aluminum originate from? Do you have the specifics about what portions of that were Russian-based, non-Russian-based. And so you don't have to declare your total value of the steel or aluminum product if you have these derivatives and have the availability of that. Of course, you need to have proof associated with it. That's part of the additional nuances that businesses and supply chains are being asked to produce now, but it's getting to that level of granularity. What we can anticipate here is that we're going to probably see more and more of that level of granularity. So businesses need to be thinking about their product library as an example, which is a great way to store a product catalog, great way to store their information at the part and SKU level. But within that, we're also asking them or having them consider really taking it to the next level. And when I say taking it to the next level, if it happens to be a kit, an assembly, a sub-assembly, if it's part of a manufactured product, keep your costed bill of material there, because that costed bill of material might be able to help you to lower your overall entered value on those specific parts that are attracting these higher duty rates. So it gets more and more complex, but it really is up to the importer of record to store all of this data and information. And one of the great ways to do that is capture that in your product library so that you then have that specificity if customs ever comes back and challenges you on that.
And great. And we'll talk through a couple of examples, as you said. And then reciprocal tariffs, tell us a little bit about this too. I mean, obviously we just walked through the high level of what's just happened, but it comes back to this act from 1934 that allows the government, that allows the administration to respond in kind. I think one of the open questions that we've had here, we'll get to it in a moment, but maybe preview that, is they've been very clear about the carve out for USMCA for the new NAFTA, but we have much visibility here on what it means for other free trade agreements and how it would interact with those.
Yeah, that's perfect. None of that was addressed yet. Korea, Australia, any of those additional free trade agreements that exist with the United States. So are we going to take a more aggressive approach with that? Or is it going to be more passive like we've seen with USMCA, granting that further extensions, if you will? That remains to be seen. But that's why we're just encouraging everybody. Again, if I go back, excuse me, to this product library type concept, you want to be tracking in the product library, just by way of example, that this product originates in Mexico. Does it qualify for a USMCA? If it does, you want to set those overall flags so that when these changes happen, it's easier for you as a business to go through and do those what if scenarios to see what your potential impact could be with this. And then it also depends if it's what level of content. So every free trade agreement that's out there really has two major components. It's either regional value content or tariff shift. Tariff shift being if the products being brought in get assembled and they get a new tariff number associated with it, or they've shifted to a new HTS number. And then there's the regional value content. So all of these trade agreements, at least most of them that are out there, and there's over 400 around the world, those regional value contents, this is where businesses need to be able to prove that, hey, for this car coming in, it's $30,000, but $10,000 I know of this is US content that satisfies the rules for US. Therefore, I can take advantage or not take advantage. It's that level of scrutiny. It's that level of detail that we're really getting into now. And it's yet to be determined, Ryan, for those other countries and those other free trade agreements. There was a lot of discussion early on about US, Canada, Mexico, USMCA. This is basically allowing for businesses to continue to reap the benefits associated with that as more considerations are coming into play. And you're probably right. They're probably looking at this at a much broader scope in terms of all of those other FTAs that exist today. How do we keep this similar across the board? Do we make it unique for each of these trading partners? And that's yet to be determined.
Okay. Let's dig in. So take us through a couple of examples here. Maybe we start on the left of this stainless steel water bottle of what, how has this evolved? This was a 2.7% duty rate, call it 10 years ago.
Yep.
And so where are we today? Show us how this stacks up.
Yeah, sure. So the term we're using is tariffs stacking, if you will. That's where one tariff adds on top of the other. And these examples that we have here are Chinese origins. So these are goods that are shipped after the April 9th. That's the transit process that Ryan was talking about earlier. The first one is the steel water bottle here. And the overall effective duty rate on this is 55.2%. We show you the HTS number that we're using here. Now below this, well, how do we get to that 55.2%. And it really is the MFN. That's the most favored nation duty rate. So that's 2.7%. And then you have the Section 301. Then you have the IEPA on top of this. Now, you would have normally the reciprocal tariff, but you don't in this case because of the Section 232s. So because of that, you have this steel tariff that goes on top of it. That's how you get to the 55.2%. Then you move to the middle one, the exact same approach here. This is a sofa that's being brought in. Okay, you see the most favored nation status for this is free, but you still have the Section 301, you have the IEPA, and you have on top of this the reciprocal tariff that we've been talking about. So your effective duty rate, which on something that was previously potentially free, of course, but for the 301 and the IEPAs, you're now at a 79% overall duty rate. And then if you take it to the far right-hand side, you've got a microwave. Again, same country of origin coming in from China. You've got the same approach here, the MFN associated with this, the 301s, the IEPA, and then you have the reciprocal tariff that's added on top of this. Okay, this is what we mean when we tell businesses you really have to take it down to the HTS level, and then within the HTS at a product and SKU level to determine what your overall effective duty rate is associated with this. Now, there's a couple of points on this. This is what Customs has said so far. This hasn't been updated in the Federal Register yet. As those updates come out, that becomes the rules and regulations that we're going to follow. Okay, but every business should have a good understanding of what they expect to pay and then what actually gets determined when they submit their 7501 and gets accepted by Customs. We do anticipate that this is going to probably generate, Ryan, some PSCs, so post summary corrections after the fact. Either the business didn't have it right, Customs systems may not have it right. That's all fine, but businesses need to have very, very good record keeping in place to understand this is what we thought we were going to pay. This is what happened. What did we miss in the rules and regulations, either up or down associated with this so that they can do that reconciliation. Okay. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of clear answers.
Most of that saying that this is a nuclear bomb for some of these businesses, and a lot of
Exactly.
many who are on the audience today. So we feel for you.
Yeah, exactly.
I will talk through a little bit about what we might expect next, but just want to get the current reality as we understand it. If nothing changes from where we are today, it's pretty grim for a lot of these countries. Now, this is China example. So in a same product, but if it's Vietnam, we would just remove, probably just to make sure I don't make any mistakes, remove Section 301, remove IEPA, but then Vietnam is at reciprocal of 46%. So did I do that right?
Correct. And again, you go through each country that overall approach on this and just making sure that you understand, obviously, which of these apply and which don't apply.
Well, we ship a lot of furniture out of Vietnam, so I wanted to zoom in on that one in particular. But okay, let's keep moving here. We probably have a few automotive customers on the line who are focused on Section 232 and steel and aluminum. Oh, by the way, it is worth noting, if you look at this one, since the Section 232 got implemented on steel and aluminum, those people were feeling especially hard hit. But if you notice, they actually got a little bit of a discount versus the non-steel and aluminum things because of how high the reciprocal tariffs are. So that's kind of interesting. Just talking through automotive Section 232 duties. Anything particularly wanted to jumped out at you for that group of customers or that group of importers and exporters?
Yeah, I mean, for the automotive, just in general, I mean, if you look up in the HTS, the definition for automotive parts is much more narrow than what the sweeping executive order is today, and meaning that there's a lot more components that are falling underneath the automotive parts associated with this. The dates we already talked about, there's the 25% on the completed cars. The U.S. content piece of this should be exempt and is. But again, that the bottom left, the automotive parts, the definition of that is different. And if you look in the middle here, the broad HTS categories, that's what we're calling out there. And then the exemptions for parts. USMCA still allows for parts, and we did put for now. That could change further down the road. And then things that are flagged but are not passenger vehicles or light trucks, their parts associated with this. Those are exemptions so far. And I think what's going to happen with this, Ryan, I mean, again, none of us have a crystal ball, but we believe what's going to happen is we're going to watch this play out. We're going to see if there's any collateral damage associated with this that was unintended. And I think you're going to continue to see updates being made on a periodic basis by the administration, trying to not destroy or put out of business a small company, but at the same time still invoke the spirit of what these reciprocal tariffs are supposed to do, and that's create that level playing field that we've been talking about.
Yeah, maybe.
Such as okay,
so then some examples of automotive world. Talk us through some of these here. So you've a couple different types of cars or car parts.
Yeah. So the first one here is the small SUV, and the country of origin for this is on Canada. So the overall effective duty rate is 10.83%. And then you see down below where we're kind of breaking this out. And this is, there's originating. So it's non-US content. It is US content. What your most favored nation status would be on this. This is for if it did qualify for USMCA. That's important to call out. So what you'd actually be paying the duty on is the 25% on the non-US content associated with it. Okay. The one in the middle, this one happens
By the
to
way,
be
you can see why more than ever you just need good technology and databases to track this. Having that what we call product library, others will call it a parts database, but just the ability to track each part in the system so that you know exactly where it was made. The dirt to shirt concept would apply to
Exactly. When we get near the end, we'll also talk about ACE and how companies can get access to this data and information from the government. And we'll do that in a minute here. But the middle one here is a sports car, that's being brought in. This one's non-USMCA. And again, we go through the same process here, determining the content. Was it US, non-US content, your most favored nation, if you will, and then what the ultimate duty rate is associated with it. Okay. And then
just realized we had a typo. I hit refresh there. So
yeah, not a problem. And then the last one, we just wanted to show you how this can get extremely high. And this just happens to be a steel car bumper. The origin of this is Chinese, and now you're up to 5% overall. And you can see where we took out the one piece of the tariff because it doesn't directly apply to this, but you see how these tariffs start stacking up on top of each other. This is businesses need to go through, and we're really suggesting, Ryan, that everybody go through and kind of map their overall supply chain. And then in mapping their supply chain, look at your last trailing 12 months from what the country of origin was, what you brought in, what your duty rate was previously, and now what your duty exposure is going forward. From a business perspective. And that gives you your overall baseline. And then that can help you if you have the luxury of changing sources of supply. But one of the things you said earlier, I just want to hit on as well, when the first time the administration rolled out a bunch of these changes, there was some safe havens. Let's go to Taiwan, let's move to this country, whatever. I don't know of any safe haven that's out there with these reciprocal tariffs and the way this is being rolled out today. So it's very difficult to sit down with a business and say, hey, move your supply chain from here to there, and you're going to save on this. That's not the case today. So you have to look at this, especially when you're looking at your net landed cost. You have to do that based on those kind of what if scenarios. If you can buy or source a product in 3 different countries, then you need to be looking at what is your true net landed cost for each of those countries and walking through this exercise.
Yeah, and again, in the initial read here, it looks like Latin America is getting lighter treatment with the lower reciprocal duty rates, but it's unclear if that's really a strategic move or just an artifact of how the rates were calculated with a relatively lazy formula. So we'll see what lasts and what goes. Let's change gears just in the interest of keeping us moving here on time. The biggest, to my view, and for a lot of our customers, the biggest bombshell dropped was the end of de minimis. And de minimis shipping, of course, is where you can fulfill orders from overseas. If they're under $800, they're duty free. Chinese e-commerce companies have become giants, making Super Bowl ads, have become enormous percentage of e-commerce in a very short time, but also tons and tons of much smaller American brands. Something like 30% of all the top 100 e-commerce companies are now doing fulfillment from Tijuana or from Canada and fulfilling duty free from there. We heard from the government, from the administration a while ago, I think it was about a month and a half ago or so, when they said that China would be shut down for de minimis, and then 2 days later they brought it back. Rumor is, and the story is, that the systems weren't ready for that. Well, yesterday they clarified that China de minimis would be ineligible starting on May 2nd. So we have about 30 days to go buy all your stuff on those sites. And for brands, that China is just the start here. So the other big news, which was buried in Section H of one of the executive orders, made it clear that they will be ending all de minimis from all countries in the world as soon as the Commerce Secretary informs the president that the systems are ready. So a little bit unclear about what that means from a date perspective. But they were able to get the systems ready for China in about, keep me honest here, Bernie, it was about a month or so, right? And that's now apparently ready for May 2nd. So it seems like if it works for one country to turn it off, then turning it off for all the countries is not that much harder. There's some nuance here. Can you talk us through what you understand on this informal, this third bullet point here, the informal versus formal entry that's required? And then they had these like, kind of MPF minimums, but also there was some postal stuff like minimums or like some art fee that you could pay if you didn't have the valuation. It wasn't that clear to me.
Yep. Yeah, so there's a lot going on with this, but you're absolutely right. This is a big hitter across the overall industry, and I'll just put this into perspective. Before the huge e-commerce boom, Customs was doing and processing about 100,000 entries on a daily basis throughout the United States. Now, when e-commerce took off, really invoking this de minimis stature, really anything coming in under $800, we went from 100,000 entries a day to 4.1 million. So now what you're talking about is you have 4 million additional potential transactions, entries that are now going to hit the United States. Okay. So now Customs has to plan for this. Our infrastructure has to plan for this, because when I say infrastructure, what if, 1%, 2% of those are flagged for exam or intensive exam? What is that going to do to the overall infrastructure? Do we have enough Customs agents? What do our facilities look like to be able to store these goods so that commerce continues to flow through it? But the third bullet here, when you look at it from an informal and a formal perspective, when you take out de minimis, you cannot bring in, it's a type 3, we call it either 321 or T86. But when that gets eliminated, you then have the choice of bringing this in as an informal entry or a formal entry. And each of those has some pros and cons. So if it's an informal, it's really coming in under $2,500. That's an informal entry. And if it's an informal entry, you still have to pay an MPF, that's a merchandise processing fee. But that merchandise processing fee, as long as you're filing it electronically, is pretty much capped at $2.62. So not a huge hit. So a lot of businesses are thinking,
I'm going to bring that's per shipment. So if I was to bring in, let's say I'm continuing to fulfill these as parcels from another country, let's say Tijuana, and you can do, my understanding is you can do 999 parcels on one entry, right? So would that be 262 per parcel or for the whole 999 parcels?
Yes. So it's per entry. So it's 262 for the entire entry that you're bringing in.
So it's more about the administrative overhead than the actual dollars in that case.
And then Customs has limitations on the line item, a line item being a specific HTS line that you're submitting to Customs. You can only go up to 999. And there's a size limitation on it as well. I don't see that hit as much as the 999, but a lot of these businesses are bringing in, as you can imagine, just tons and tons of product, tons and tons of different HTS codes, if you will, which are exceeding these overall limits. So,
and one of the things that we're seeing that's under the de minimis program, they didn't have to register their manufacturer IDs with CBP, whereas under the regular entry process, you do. And so there's quite a bit we're finding as we help customers make this transition, there's quite a bit of overhead required to go get each factory's information entered into the database for CBP. So there's some one-time setup fee each time there's a new factory, a new origin point, which can be quite costly at the scale of some of these operations.
Correct. Because every business now that wasn't subject to these rules and regulations now is. So they have to go out to their product catalog, product library, whatever you want to call it, their SKUs and parts list, and gather this additional information. And if that specific HTS number coming from this country requires an MID, a manufacturer's ID, that has to already be on file with Customs. And I know a lot of this sounds daunting, and it is, but if you're waiting till time of import to actually gather this data and information, there's the time value of money, there's storage, there's demurrage, and then from a customer
there's the customer experience, because in these cases they've sold the goods, so that's the most. Correct. That's probably the main thing they're thinking about is like we got to, you're already at a disadvantage fulfilling from another country. the playing field's now been leveled for customs duties. So we're seeing a lot of companies, try to reshore this because shipping from far away, it increases the obviously the shipping time, but also the complexity of, you're crossing a border at the moment you've already sold the goods, and there's all kinds of extra risk and delays that can happen because of that. So we have seen, in Flexport's case, we operate 5 fulfillment centers in the United States, and we've seen almost a doubling of demand over the last 2 months as companies have been preparing for this. We're having to invest to go vertical in our buildings to add more capacity to support it. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And so if this is important for you, it's probably something you need to get ahead of, because there's going to be a huge percentage of the world's e-commerce companies have been using this program. And there's probably not that much excess capacity in the U.S. warehousing footprint to be able to bring them all back at once. So encourage you to kind of get ahead of that game.
Yeah.
But let's keep us moving here to make sure we have time for questions. So, obviously the left side of this, people know, especially if you're in the game, you're feeling it. The middle one, maybe a little bit less obvious, but almost 50% during peak season, almost 50% of all the air freight in the world is Chinese e-commerce parcels. And so we would expect that there'd be a decline in that just based on the laws of supply and demand. If the price goes up, then for the end consumer, they may buy less things, and the complexity that we just talked about. So that may lead to a lowering of air freight prices. Some of the high rates you've seen for the last year have been in part driven by this boom in e-commerce. And then obviously, some of the companies in doing fulfillment in these countries are going to have a problem as they lose customers. So let's talk through briefly some of the areas. I think we might have already hit on some of these. I talked about the first bullet. We can skip that, but there's still a lot of open question about how the free trade agreements will interact that are non-USMCA. The postal calculation is a bit overdone, actually. Just in the interest of time, we'll skip that. But if you want to learn more about that, there's some nuance there. What about Section 232? Did we talk about that already? Is exempted from reciprocal duties are paid? You can just kind of get us. We're kind of showing you inside this how the sausage is made here. We're still trying to learn. This is all pretty 24 hours new, so that's a question we want to go answer. And then, what about this last one, Bernie?
Yeah, shall apply only to the non-U.S. content subject to the article. So this is kind of what we were talking about previously. This is where businesses need to be looking at their individual products, their kits, their assemblies, their sub-assemblies, their buildup of overall product. They need to understand the costed bill of material and country of origin for each of those to be able to do these carve-outs and these derivatives that we've been talking about here. So that's where we're really telling our clients and our prospects, if you will, to basically be vigilant about getting that data and information. The time you have, the best time businesses have to gather this information is before, even if it's a related party and you're striking an agreement with a foreign manufacturer. You want to call out all of the data that you're expecting from them in advance. And if there's a manufacturer's affidavits that's needed, a certificate of origin, you want to make that part of your overall procurement process. So not only can you load it into your product library, but now if you ever get challenged from customs, you can produce that. And by the way, if your supply chain partner told you that this country of origin that they had validated and it turns out to be invalidated, you might be able to go back to them and charge them the additional duties, taxes, and fees that you're incurring. So it's just a better way to manage the data and information flow on this, because it's always been important, but never as important as it is now.
Okay, well, let's the main point here is there's still some open questions, and we're going to do another webinar next week, and assuming that we'll see when the Code of Federal Regulations at the CFR actually gets updated, but we'll have to do another one as soon as we get time to digest that as well. So we are going to be learning in this together and doing everything we can to give you our expertise. Thought I'd take a step back and step up, 30,000 foot view of how did we get here? Why are we doing this? I took a couple of these from a great presentation that you can find from JP Morgan's chief economist. I'll link to that as well in a post that we do on this. But about what, where did this come from? I think he tried to do a pretty good job of being somewhat balanced on the whole thing. And ultimately, this graph right here explains what the Trump administration is setting out to do, showing that U.S. industrial production has really been flat for the last 25 years. And they see that as a major problem, both economically, culturally, and from a national security standpoint, and want to do something about it. And one thing that's certain in this world is if you get a bunch of people in a room and say, we need to do something, you will do something. And so they've done something, and they have put in these tariffs. This is the long run view of tariffs. Tariffs have been around since, I think there's evidence of tariffs that go back to like the first piece of writing out of Hammurabi's stele in ancient Sumeria or whatever, ancient Babylon. But you can see that we're now at a level of tariff that we haven't seen in about 100 years. And we're assuming that these stick, and that's a big assumption that we'll get to in a moment. But you know, that last peak that you see, and we're above that, is the Smoot-Hawley tariffs of 1930, which many economists attribute as a major contributor to the Great Depression. So let's not go there. Hopefully we find a path out of this, but we are on, I don't want to say unprecedented grounds, but certainly since the end of World War II, and before that even, that we are seeing rates that we haven't seen really in a long time. Also, you know, so, and I kind of think, well, what else have we seen is, from a macro standpoint, stocks are way down this morning, 4% decline in the S&P, minus almost 6% in the NASDAQ. Nike was down 12, Shopify down 10%, Amazon down 7%. So some of the companies you would expect to be hit. It also tells you really that Wall Street didn't get this. I tuned into a Goldman Sachs webinar this morning, and they said they had predicted, they had forecast a 15% kind of weighted average duty across all countries if you weight the actual trade volumes times the duty rate. And this ended up at 18%. And so, yeah, we saw some really extreme examples, and some of you are hit by extreme examples, but 18% is where it weights out across the board on average, according to Goldman Sachs. That is higher than they predicted, therefore more inflationary than predicted. Pretty much all economists are aligned right now saying this is going to be really bad for growth. And I think the administration kind of knew that was going to happen and did it anyways, which is interesting. They have stated that their goal is to lower the 10-year interest rate and they did achieve that. Went down by 30 basis points today, interest rates. So maybe that's good. You can borrow money a little bit cheaper than you could yesterday, which for those of us paying mortgages might be a good thing. But ultimately, you know, the thing that I'm reminded here is like tariffs are not time machines. You can't magically restore those glory days of manufacturing by putting this in, and putting it in on such a steep curve gives businesses, as you all know out there in the audience, very, very little time to plan. And there's so much uncertainty that it's like hard to even act on this. In fact, I spoke last Thursday with a cabinet member, and he kind of previewed, he didn't give me the details of this, but he did say that the thing that really jumped out to me was he said, you should know that April 2nd, yesterday, is going to be the start and not the end of the process. And what he meant by that, and you saw the Treasury Secretary reiterate that in a Wall Street Journal interview yesterday, saying that this is the ceiling unless countries retaliate, and then they might go higher, but that ultimately this is a starting point for a negotiation. And you saw already Vietnam and Israel yesterday, or maybe the day before yesterday, announced that they would take US tariffs on U.S. goods to zero. I expect other countries to come to the table, make deals, and that we may see these numbers ratchet back down. And one would hope, right? I think that's that is what a lot of companies really have to hope for, because a duty over 100% on certain categories of goods from China is probably a non-starter. It will certainly lead to less demand for goods if you're going to have to pass those prices through. They're just too high not to pass them through to your customer. At a macro level, the U.S. is far less dependent on imported goods. Probably this audience doesn't really care, because you all are, almost by definition, are doing a lot of importing and exporting. But as an economy, only 14% of our GDP is imported goods. So we produce. So what that could mean is that there's a real shift from buying things that are made overseas to not just made in America, but switching categories altogether. You may prefer to do something like spend your money on going to a restaurant or getting drunk. Hopefully not at 11 a.m. this morning, but I bet you there's some people who don't know what to do with themselves right now. So, and it is so. Now let's talk about what to do next. I think first off is to remember that in a crisis, and for many of you, many of us, this is a crisis. There's no other way to put it. But in a crisis, people will rally to the calmest person in the room. And as leaders, I think you have to. That's true of your employees right now. They're looking for leadership, and there's good reason to remain calm on some level. Is that all of these projections, all of these numbers we've shown are assuming nothing changes. And one thing we've seen over the last few months is that we definitely don't live in a static world, and the word permanent and the Trump administration probably shouldn't end up in the same sentence. So we should expect there's some negotiating posture, there's some deal making, there's some changes to come. And the goal of business is to make money, but it's velocity. The way you're going to make money is having velocity is what we call speed in the right direction, out executing your competition, making better decisions in a moment where there's so much uncertainty and really borderline chaos. Sometimes the highest velocity thing you can do is stay put and observe and make sure because going in the wrong direction is negative velocity, and it can be fatal in a high stakes situation. And so on some level, observing, we're still in that phase of observing and orienting ourselves to what all of this means. And we're not necessarily even in the moment of making decisions and taking action. That probably we want to continue to gather information, synthesize it, observe more what changes are coming down the pipeline. Now, there are some real non-regrettable decisions that you should probably be doing anyways. First off, digging into some of the classification of your products, the valuation of your products, making sure you're taking advantage of all the various free trade agreements and other programs. We've built a system where we take your data out of ACE, obviously with your permission, but ACE is the U.S. Customs automated commercial environment where your data lives. And under the Freedom of Information Act, you have the right to your data for the last 5 years. And you can go back and collect that data and start to analyze it. And our team will be happy to help you with that, to help you take you through checklists of ways to improve your compliance and save you money. Every year, $6 billion of duty drawbacks of refunds that are available to American businesses. Every year, $6 billion goes unclaimed because people don't know about it. So if you're not running a drawbacks program, great moment to set that up. Even if some of these new duties are not available for drawback, we know that we got one customer a $14 million check last month. So there are opportunities there. You're exploring new factories. You probably have already started to do that, but this is not. There's no harm in starting to look around the world and seeing where else you could do it. In Latin America, if the world stays the way it is, the duties stay where they are, then Latin America is clearly the winner for that. Another thing that I want to warn people against is I've seen a lot. I've already talked to a number of customers who have told me that their manufacturer is offering to serve as the importer of record of the goods, as the foreign importer of record, sell them goods at prices that don't make sense, that are actually lower than the duties themselves. And I want to just call your attention that the last thing you want to do is make a bad situation worse and take the risk of going to federal prison. This is illegal. And there are, by the way, whistleblower, the CBP will give you up to 10% of any fines and recover dollars that they make. And so you may want to take advantage of that. But ultimately, don't break the law. Don't be tempted into that. In a crisis, you may lose your head and do some things. The enforcement is at an all-time high and going to keep ratcheting up. It's the one area of the government that they will be hiring more people in is probably customs inspections. And then finally, I want to leave you, and we'll take some questions, but the role of government here ultimately is to set the rules, and then it's up to all of us to go figure out how to run a good business and make money in that. And there's get a little bit more clarity here. I think we're past peak uncertainty, but not yet. We don't yet have real certainty about what's going to happen. But we're going to get more clarity over the coming weeks. And then your job, as it always has been, isn't any different than it has been, is to go find a way to make money and outcompete. Your competitors are probably in the same boat as you are right now. And when there's big changes in the world like this, is big moment of opportunity for you to go and win. And so I'll leave there as I switch into question mode here. We'll run over a little bit since we're long-winded. But this is a quote from Winston Churchill. I have it up on the wall in my office that a friend of mine sent me. And it's, never give in. Business is hard. It's meant to be hard. You don't make money doing easy things. And you got to rally your team and get creative and find a way to never, ever give in, as the great Winston Churchill once said. So with that, let's flip over to Q&A. I've got a lot of questions. We're going to try to do lightning round. Why don't we say we'll stop in 15 minutes and tackle a few of these. So Bernie, I'm mostly going to ask them to you because people are asking some pretty technical stuff. Let's try to do a lightning round though. If you have something quick, we don't need to go too far. So the first one I have here, by the way, a lot of these are pretty detailed. So I might, rather than answering individual personal questions, in the interest of time, point Bernie and others on our trade advisory team are happy to talk to you about your personal situation. I'm going to try to hit ones that are more applicable to lots of people, which might be a little tricky. One here is China is the 34% tariff stackable on China imports. Asking, I think we answered this, but asking if it compounds on top of existing ones, and
it does.
The answer is yes, but not for 232. That's included, but not cumulative. So yeah, I think we answered that one. Confirm that HTS code subject to section 232. Oh wow, some of these are really detailed. I don't know if we want to bore everybody with all of them. We'll get to your questions. We'll have our customs team reach out to you. We do have your names if you submitted them. What implications these tariffs have on signed free trade agreements? Yep, we already said that that's unclear at this moment, other than USMCA. I'm seeing, let me read through these. Starting April 5th, we expect a 10% tariff to be assessed on furniture imports from Vietnam. However, as reading in section 3 and highlighting in below, if goods are loaded onto a vessel at the port of loading in Vietnam before April 5th, they will not be subject to this additional tariff. In other words, we'd only pay the 10% tariff for goods loaded after April 5th. Is that correct?
Yep.
Loaded and departed is the nuance. Oh, I didn't catch that.
Correct.
Yep. Oh, wow. So the ship has to depart. Man, that's really out of you got it on the ship. You've done your part. And then the ship has to actually sail off, huh? Interesting. Okay, I've got a Vietnam furniture importer here. So he's asking the same question. ETD of date loaded on the vessel. It's about departure date. Reciprocal tariffs. Nothing was noted regarding drawback in the executive order. Are we sure they're not eligible for that? Good call out. Our team notes it's not 100% certain until the Federal Register noticed. But IEPA, the act under which these are being enacted, have not previously been eligible for drawback. So that is where we are assuming that these new ones are also not eligible. But we will not know until the Code of Federal Regulations gets updated. So stay tuned for that. Bernie, what is this? What type of products are protected by the USMCA, and what is subject to the 25% tariff?
The 25%, so non-USMCA qualifying goods. So for USMCA, there's two major components, like any free trade agreement. There's the regional value content that is established at a country level, and then there's the tariff shift. And a tariff shift is if you combine all of the products for a car, by way of example, and it comes out with a new tariff or a new HTS associated with it. That's kind of a tariff shift. So anything that doesn't fall under the USMCA is going to get hit by this 25% that is sitting out there today. So that's really the distinction that's being made. But I think what's going to happen with this, as we talked about earlier, we're going to look at these, the government's going to look at these as each free trade agreement and then what makes sense within those trade agreements. Again, not meaning, we believe, to cause collateral damage associated with this, to allow businesses that have set up manufacturing locations not to have or to take a huge hit overnight, but they are setting the stage. This could change down the road.
Yep. This is interesting. We have some anonymous intel here. Someone says, what's your opinion on what will stick and what will be roughly resolved over the next few days? This person says that reportedly from inside the administration, the Vietnam tariffs of 46% has already been resolved, just not announced. Just and then he wants to know my best guess. Well, it sounds like you might have intel I don't have in that case. But I tend to agree. I don't know about Vietnam in particular, but I do think you're going to see some of these things come back down. They're just too high for me to imagine that all of this stays in place forever. I think it's very much you're going to see this get negotiated down, make some deals. Vietnam has come to the table and offered to eliminate U.S. tariffs on U.S. goods, but they probably want more concessions than that. And one of the stories I hear is that, a lot of what the government is looking for is more allies to take the United States' side in any dispute with China and put tariffs on Chinese goods. But that, again, rumor, we will see what actually plays out. Let's take one or two more questions here. Someone asked, will we be hosting another webinar after the Federal Register is published? That is certainly true. The next one that we have scheduled is April 9th. You will get an invite to that. Keep your eye out for your email. And then, like this one, we'll probably do an emergency one if there's something worth that we think is worthy of just getting everybody together and sharing what we know and what's changed. And there's another final question, actually a great place to leave us with a little bit more uncertainty, is what's up with those 25% Venezuela tariffs that were announced? This is on countries importing oil from Venezuela, which I think is everybody, right? Have they published a list yet of who imports oil from Venezuela and who doesn't?
Not that I've seen, but I haven't specifically looked for it.
Yeah, they haven't. There hasn't been an update since the initial announcement, is my understanding. Certainly, nothing's been implemented. But that would be presumably cumulative on top of everything that you've seen here is another 25%. Again, we will see what comes down the pipe as things change. But at this point, you're in really another 25% would put you back. We'd have to extend that graph back to the 1800s because we already went back 100 years and we've got the highest duties. So probably put you in some really uncharted territory there. We'll see. So thus far, we don't know the answer to that. And so with that, that's all the questions that we had today. I want to say a big thank you to our folks for coming in. I know this is a ugly, messy morning for you to try to sort through this. We feel you. We're going to be working overtime to get containers loaded before, try to see as many as we can to get onto ships before the cutoff dates here. And then we will obviously be super in tune with any new regulations, and Bernie and his team are available. Would love to talk through folks with their specific cases and look for opportunities to make sure that you're more compliant and identify opportunities to save on duties. That is what our team prides themselves to do, especially the more compliant piece, because there's a lot of operations out there that might try to get you to cut corners, but this is not the moment to do that. You want to make sure you're dialing your compliance process and at the same time looking for opportunities to improve your financials. So with that, we'll probably wrap here and say a big thank you to everybody. Thank you for your business, and we look forward to talking to all of you again soon.
Okay. Thank you.